Picture an empire so vast, its roads stitched together continents, its legions marching like clockwork across the known world. And yet, in the quiet shadows of marble halls, the beating heart of Rome began to falter, not with a scream, but with a whisper. Its borders touched 3 continents. Its roads stitched together lands and peoples who had once been strangers, and now called themselves Roman. For centuries, it seemed unstoppable, a machine of stone, steel, and law that bent the world to its will. And yet, the greatest empire the world had ever seen did not end with a single sword thrust, nor with a final cry in the forum. No, Rome's end was far slower, far quieter, and far more human. It began like the fading of daylight. One moment, the sun was high, and the marble gleamed. The next, shadows stretched longer, and no one noticed they were losing the day. If you had walked the streets of Rome in the mid-4th century, you would have seen the markets alive with trade. Senators in crimson-trimmed togas, debating beneath towering columns, and legions still patrolling the edges of the empire. The world still bowed to Rome. But under that surface, something was shifting. Grain shipments from Africa delayed. Silver in the coins thinned. Roads patched, but never fully repaired. The empire still worked, but each gear groaned just a little louder than before. Corruption, once a rumor in the provinces, became the language of politics. Armies on the frontiers, once hardened by endless campaigns, now fought beside men who had never faced a true enemy. The borders still held, but they no longer felt unbreakable. And yet, the people did not see an empire dying. They saw an empire living, as it always had, just with a few more struggles, a few more sacrifices. Year after year, generation after generation, Rome adjusted to its own weakening pulse. Her leaders mistook endurance for immortality. Her citizens mistook survival for strength. By the time the barbarians gathered at her gates, the Rome they sought to conquer was not the Rome of legend. She had already shed her armor for robes. She had already traded the discipline of her legions for the comfort of tradition. And so, when the Visigoths poured through the walls in 410, the world gasped. But Rome herself had been fading for centuries. Her fall was not an event. It was a season, a long autumn where the leaves fell one by one, until at last winter came, and the eternal city stood bare. But it was not the barbarian's sword that truly killed Rome. No, her greatest wounds were carved from within. The rot began in the marble halls, not on the battlefield. Senators no longer fought for the empire. They fought for themselves. Power became a currency, traded in whispers and bribes. Gold meant more than honor. Titles could be bought. Loyalty could be sold. Rome's leaders forgot the virtues that had built the empire. Discipline, sacrifice, unity. They built statues to their own glory, while the aqueducts cracked. They threw lavish games to distract the masses, while the grain stores ran thin. And the people, the very lifeblood of Rome, felt the strain. Taxes rose until farmers abandoned their fields. Merchants, once the heartbeat of the economy, found their trade routes choked by red tape and greed. Every coin carried less silver. Every promise from the Senate carried less truth. Meanwhile, The legions, Rome's iron shield, were neglected. Veterans retired, without replacements. Entire units were filled with hired foreigners, loyal not to Rome, but to whoever paid them most. The army was still feared in name, but inside it was hollow. The empire was a great stone arch, still standing, still beautiful, but with the keystone cracked. And the crack widened, year after year, under the weight of its own corruption. By the time the first enemy banners appeared on the horizon, the fight was already lost. Rome had been bleeding out for decades, not from battle, but from betrayal. Her borders were breached long before they were crossed. For in the end, no enemy can truly conquer a people until they first conquer themselves. As the empire's spirit withered, the earth itself seemed to turn against her. The climate shifted, subtly at first, then with merciless persistence. Winters grew harsher. Summers grew shorter. The fertile fields of North Africa, once Rome's breadbasket, began to yield less grain. Drought crept across the provinces like an unseen army, strangling the harvest before it could be gathered. And hunger is an enemy no legion can defeat. In the crowded streets of the cities, famine bred unrest. In the countryside, desperate farmers abandoned their lands, seeking refuge in towns already bursting at the seams. Food prices soared. Bread became a luxury. The state tried to fix it, issuing decrees, controlling prices, but their efforts were like throwing pebbles into a rising tide. Then came the plagues. Disease spread along the very roads and ships that once carried Rome's wealth. Entire villages emptied in days. Armies found themselves too weak to march. Their camps turned into open graves. The mighty capital, once a beacon of life, stank of sickness. Each calamity weakened the empire's muscles, made her borders softer, her people more desperate. And desperation is fertile ground for rebellion. Whispers of the gods' anger grew louder. Some said Rome had lost the favor of Jupiter. Others claimed the new faith, Christianity, had invited divine wrath. Belief itself fractured, adding spiritual unrest to the turmoil. Nature did not strike all at once. It pressed year after year, storm after storm, plague after plague, an unrelenting siege without banners, without armies, without mercy. And as the rivers ran lower, as the soil grew thinner, as the air carried the cough of the sick, Rome's great engines slowed to a crawl. The empire that had conquered the world could not conquer the sky above or the ground beneath. But perhaps the most profound change came not from politics, nor war, nor famine, but from the shifting soul of Rome herself. For centuries, Romans had defined themselves by discipline, duty, and the unshakable belief that they were the chosen stewards of the world. But the Rome of the late empire was a different creature entirely. The old gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, once worshipped in grand temples, saw their altars abandoned. A new faith spread through the streets, across the provinces, into the very heart of the imperial palace. Christianity, once outlawed and persecuted, became the empire's official religion. It offered hope, compassion, salvation, but it also rewrote the very foundations of Roman identity. Loyalty shifted from the empire to the church. The emperor was no longer a divine figure, but a mortal under God's authority. And with that shift came new priorities, new laws, new allegiances. To the devout, this was a moral awakening, the dawn of a better world. To others, it was the breaking of Rome's spine. The military virtues that had built the empire Iron discipline, ruthless efficiency were no longer the center of the Roman spirit. Instead, the empire wrestled with itself, torn between the legacy of its pagan past and the demands of its Christian future. Art changed. Laws changed. Even the calendar changed. The Rome that had once measured time by the festivals of ancient gods now marked the years by the life of Christ. And in the process, the old unifying myth, the belief that Rome was eternal because Rome was Rome, began to fade. When the Visigoths and Vandals came, they were not just raiding a city. They were stepping into a civilization in the middle of redefining itself. Rome's walls still stood, her banners still flew. But inside, she was no longer the empire that had once commanded the known world. An empire's strength is not just in its armies or its walls. It is in the story its people believe about themselves. And when that story changes, the empire changes with it. And so, when we speak of Rome's fall, we speak in shadows and half-truths. For the empire did not vanish into the dark like a torch snuffed out. It burned lower and lower until its flame flickered into something new. The Western Empire, yes, its emperors toppled, its legions scattered, its marble stolen to build the palaces of its conquerors. But the essence of Rome, her laws, her language, her dreams of order and civilization, they did not die. They changed shape. Roman roads still carry travelers long after the eagle standards were gone. Hello, charlottes, floods. Roman law still guided kings who had never seen the city itself. And Latin, the tongue of the empire, became the mother of new languages, whispering in Spanish, singing in French, echoing in Italian. Even her faith, transformed from pagan altars to Christian cathedrals, continued to bind Europe together in ways no army ever could. The so-called barbarians who took her cities did not erase her. They wore her armor. They minted coins with her symbols. They crowned themselves with her titles. Rome lived on in the kingdoms that followed, not as an empire of stone and steel, but as an idea that would outlast every wall and every war. And so the truth is this: Rome did not truly fall. She evolved. Her death was a metamorphosis, and from the ashes of her empire, the foundations of the modern world were laid. The eternal city was never truly gone. She was simply reborn.